Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Corey Camp, and for today's episode, we have Mindy Polansky, one of the elite team members of our virtual coaching team. And in addition to coaching for Sibme, Mindy is completing her 29th year in education. She's been an instructional coach, as well as a classroom teacher. She's a national board certified teacher and a local letters trainer, and a master teacher for the state of Maryland. So currently, Mindy teaches all content areas to her third graders. Welcome, Mindy.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. We're recording this right after the new year, so I am just adjusting to 2020 life and I'm just getting back to work. So I'm excited that you're here with us today because we're going to be talking about transitions during the school day, and specifically identifying the impact of transitions, the typical transitions that we have, how long that they take, and how to set our students up for success when transitioning. So tell us a little bit, what do we mean by transitions for anyone who might be new to education or might need that operationally defined? What do we mean by transitions, and why are they so important to us in the scope of academics?
So a lot of people think, oh, you have such a long time during the day. You've got 6.5 hours of teaching, and really there is a lot of instructional time that can be lost. And one of the biggest culprits is transitions. Transitions are those times when students or even teachers are moving from one thing to the next. And if not taught properly, if not thought about before teaching, they can really eat up a lot of time. So it's really important that teachers identify transitions within their day, identify developmentally what's appropriate to expect from a transition from students, and to practice those transitions so that students are aware of how those times are impacting their instructional time as well.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I think back to years ago when I was a first year teacher. I definitely knew about like entering and exiting the classroom and the times that we were transitioning from the classroom to like the library. But it was those little bitty transitions that I didn't give much thought to that first year. And then I'm excited we're going to talk about kind of how to identify transitions, because I was constantly looking for a list of the different transitions that I might need to have a procedure for and we might need to practice and train on. So how do we begin to identify those transitions then?
Well, like you said, they're the obvious ones, the ones when they're coming in and they have to put their book bag away or they're get ready with their materials. And then when the bell rings, if it's middle school or high school, how they get up and leave. But what I do is I go through my entire day and I think about when my students are going to have to shift from one thing to the next. So, for example, if we start off with our language arts lesson and I'm teaching vocabulary or word study, and then they have to shift and decide, they have to take out their notebook because they're going to share a response from the previous day. That's a transition. Not just because you say, all right, take out your notebook and turn to your ELA tab. There's a lot that goes on there. So I go through and I think about what I have to do during the lesson and what my students have to do. And then I can identify the transitions that I need to model for my students and have them practiced and give them feedback and discuss, success criteria of what a good transition should look like. And ultimately the goal is let's transition in the appropriate amount of time so that we can get our work done.
Yeah. And so talk to me a little bit about when this happens. So it sounds like you're talking about just in the general lesson plan, but we kind of do this at the beginning of the year as well to identify those key ones that can be like your mainstays throughout the
right.
The
And
year.
that's what I do at the beginning. It's definitely, I have a chart that I, tick off. Okay, I've taught this strategy. I've taught this strategy for transition. So you don't want to overwhelm children at the beginning of students at the beginning of the year. So you pick out the ones that are most critical for them to learn at the beginning. And you also have to keep in mind that there's going to be plenty of times that you're going to have to review and reinforce and restate your expectations for the transition. So absolutely at the beginning of the year, think about all those transitions, because those are the routines and expectations that you need to have in place in order to be able to have a successful lesson. I mean, you could create the most engaging and synergetic lesson, but if your transitions get in the way, you're never going to get time to complete the lesson. So
yeah. Oh my gosh, that is the truth. I know we've talked about this in another replay episode with another coach that I was speaking with. And I talked about how I ran into trouble with pacing pretty early on, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And for me, it was my own routine as a teacher, as I greeted students at the door, and then I got caught at the door, minding the students who were walking really slow to their class, and then they need to hurry up. And I spent all my time at the door. And then I came in and would chat with a few students and kind of create those personal connections. And by the time I actually started my lesson, way more time than in my mind, that entering transition actually happened. So how much time should these transitions take? How do you kind of plan that out? Because that's something to consider, right? That was what I was not considering in my lesson plans.
Right. So first you want to think about the age or the developmental level of the student. If you're going to give multi-step directions, for maybe a high school class or a middle school class, maybe they can have those multi-step directions. But in some of the elementary schools, you have to really make sure you break it down and give them the amount of time that is pushing them just enough to let them know that this is a habit that you're going to have to get into because this is the amount of time I'm giving you for it. You also have to think about processing speed that children have. Some children process at a different speed than other children. I have a funny story. This year we were talking about coming in from recess, and my classroom is on the second floor of the building. And so I felt like it was taking a long time for us to come in and settle down from recess. So I asked the boys and girls, how long do they think it should take us? And I had one student that said 45 seconds. And I wasn't sure where our jetpacks were at that point.
That's right.
That's a little too short of a time. And then I had somebody else say 5 minutes. No, that's a little bit too long. So it's good to get a student's perspective, but it could be trial and error. You might have to say, well, I think it should take 3 minutes, and then time it. Get out the timer. See how long it takes. See what's getting in your way. Sometimes it's the teacher who is causing some of the
that was me.
right. I would do the same thing. I would catch myself. I'm very big on videotaping myself because that way I can go back and reflect on what I've said, how I've said it, who I'm looking at. And a lot of the time I was missing time because I couldn't find things I was looking for. So I had to set up a station for myself so that I could shave some of that time off. And it didn't occur to me that I was the one causing the lost time. And so the kids were just following my example. So yeah, I would start with erring on the side of a little bit too much time and then see if you can shave time off.
Yeah, we used to, speaking of I used to carry a stopwatch with me. And so when we were practicing a new transition, we would talk about, okay, I think this should take us only about 5 seconds, to move from working with your partner to back to your seat. And then we would kind of time that and see how close we could get. And sometimes we'd have to bump it up a little bit. Sometimes we'd realize, 5 seconds is generous enough for us to move just this couple of feet and get settled and like everybody's still. So I would use that stopwatch. And then I also use the stopwatch on my projector so they could see the time. Most of the time though, that stopwatch was for me. So I could make sure that I'm not kind of getting caught into a rabbit hole or I'm still trying to find my stuff. So I think that's great.
I'm sorry. The other thing is that sometimes students have no perception of time.
Yes.
They don't know what 45 seconds feels like or, 5 seconds looks like. So, So it's important that they are aware of the expectations, that they're aware of their time and, how they are. And one of the things that I like to use is a doorbell. I don't know if you've ever seen those wireless doorbells now that teachers are using in the classroom. And so they have all different melodies. And I took the time to time each one of the different melodies to see. And so when I press the doorbell and they hear a certain song, they know they have till the end of that song to get to do whatever, get ready for the next thing. And some doorbell chimes are longer than others. So
Mhm.
it worked out pretty good. So that's another thing to help cue students into this. I know the song's going to end in a couple seconds, so I better
Yeah.
hurry up and do what I need to do.
I love that you mentioned that. I also use like music to help my transitions. And so American Idol and Philip Phillips was really big, and his song Home came out. And so that was our song to go back to your desk. Anytime we had any kind of in-class transition and they needed to move back to their desk and be ready to come back together as a whole group, I had just a short clip, and it was timed. So they knew exactly how long that clip was, and it would play just the chorus of that song. And then they'd all be kind of singing it as they get back to their space. And
Right.
I loved using music for transitions. I
So do
think
I.
it was,
So do I.
students kind of entering the classroom to kind of set the tone when we were reading like Sleepy Hollow, and all those things were a lot of fun. And I love that you mentioned recording yourself to, kind of look at that and gauge, how everybody, I also did that. And so sometimes I would see that, so-and-so just has no idea what he's doing at this time.
Right.
He's just kind of looking around at everybody else to kind of follow the leader. And I had some students who needed their own kind of checklist and those individual supports as well. So I would kind of think about who needs that based off of what I see on that video.
Right.
So you figured out how much time it's going to take. You've identified the transitions first, and then figured out about how much time it will take. What's next when we talk about our transitions?
So the next thing is, it's critical that you model for the students what you expect them to do. So, for example, in the morning, I also play a song called Good Morning, and they come in and they're supposed to go to their lockers, put their stuff away, go to their desk, get a chair, all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of me telling them, I think it's so critical that you put the onus on them to see what it is that you're doing so they can describe it, and then they make it their own. So I would, tell them, okay, right now we're going to practice transitioning from whole group to small group. Now, watch what I do. And I don't say anything. And that was really difficult for me because I'm a talker and I like to narrate everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm,
but when you do that, it takes responsibility away from the students to pay attention, because they don't need to look, because you're narrating it for them. So I would execute the transition properly, and then I would have students raise their hands and tell me, what did they notice? Well, I noticed that as soon as the transition music started, you put your paper in the binder, you closed your binder, and then you put it in your desk. Okay. Or if someone says, I noticed you didn't shove your work in your desk. Okay, well, what did you see me do? So yes, they can tell you what they didn't see, but ultimately you want them to tell you what they did see. And then they have students come up and one at a time model for you and for the class, sort of like a fishbowl activity where everybody's looking. I wouldn't have the whole class do it, but at some point during the day, you want to make sure that everybody knows the expectations. They've got that like muscle memory going on for what it's going to feel like when we transition. So those interactive modeling where, you don't say a word and you just do the expectation. And after that, then we would list the success criteria. Okay, so what will it look like if we want to be successful in transitioning from whole group to small group? What's that going to look like? Or how will we know we're being successful if by the time we switch classes and the next class comes in and we're ready to start, how will we know we'll be successful? Well, because at 12:40, we need to start teaching and learning, and we look at the clock and yep, there it is. It's 12:40. So
yeah. And that's helpful because then you can identify that success criteria as you see it. So you can say, I see Sally is already at her desk with her pencils out and her book open, and, great job. And now I see, Sally's friend doing it. So you can kind of support and reinforce, do that positive reinforcement of that success criteria as well. So,
and if the student isn't doing the right thing, you could call on them and say, okay, Holly, what should you be doing right now? What is our expectations? So that cues them into, oh, wait a minute, what was I supposed to be doing? So,
yeah, definitely. So then identified, we've timed it out, we have practiced, we've done some interactive modeling, and now it's time to look at that smooth transition, right? Because it doesn't happen the first day. That's something when I'm coaching teachers, I'm like, I mean, give it a good week. If you're doing it every day, if this is not an everyday thing, know that it's going to take some time to work those kinks out.
Absolutely.
So what does this look like for you?
So again, practice makes permanent. So if you practice it the wrong way, it's going to be a habit in the wrong way. So you want to always provide that feedback, corrective feedback. And I have a chart in my room that has all of the transitions that we're working on. It doesn't list every single transition, but all the ones we're working on, and a date, and I time it. And so we can see our progress. And then we can, then as a class, because I do morning meetings, through responsive classroom, and we talk about, okay, what went well with this transition, what didn't go well, and many times students have said, well, you gave the directions too quickly, or I wasn't finished doing my work and I didn't hear. So then that leads me to another thing that I need to do. I need an attention signal to help let them know that transitions are starting. So it really behooves you to collaborate with your students, because they see things that you might not see, that you might not even catch if you're videotaping, letting them unpack their thinking as to why things happen the way they do. So
do you ever show your students the video of the transition so you can kind of look back at that together? I know some teachers who have done that and have been very successful.
I have done that, but I have to make sure, just like when you show student work or things like that we are all learning together, that we're not going to laugh at anything. We're not going to, make, excuses or point fingers, but it's just as a community, that's how we grow and how we get along and how we work to solve each other's problems and work towards our goals. So,
yeah, I think that's really powerful. And, that's something that, that will really, like you said, it's going to take you much further in the long run to kind of go through that and figure out, okay, I need a stronger attention signal. That's why the kids in the back corner of the room didn't start moving with everybody else, because they didn't hear me at that time. So,
and you've also picked up on something that's really critical, is the why. I mean, no matter how old the student is, you need to tell them why, because that way they can buy into it. So if they don't know, so one of the things we do to help with transition is a call and respond. And so I'll say class, class, and the class responds yes, yes. Or if I say class, hocus pocus, they'll say yes, everybody focus. But the first couple of times I use that, I didn't tell them why. So they didn't really know why we were doing it.
Why am I saying this?
Right, I'm saying it, but I'm still doing whatever it is that so I had to tell them the reason why we're doing this is so that you can know that that's your signal that you need to stop and that we're going to transition into something else. So it's really important that they know what the transition is. They know how to transition. They know what a successful transition looks like. And they know that the reason why it's important to transition the way we do.
Yeah. And, I'd also like to remind everyone that, sometimes you've got a great plan and it looks good on paper and it goes well in the modeling, but then in actuality, it doesn't work very well. I had a teacher, she was doing stations for the first time, middle school. And I was coaching with her, and she was really nervous about doing stations, and she put everything together. She had this beautiful preparation of each of these stations. She had 7 stations they were going to be rotating through.
Yeah.
And it went well when we modeled it, and it went well with the first group. But what she realized by the end of it, she just couldn't handle. She's like, I don't think these groups are for me, because when they transition, like desks moved, like we had big football players kind of moving through the classroom, and by the end of the class period, everything was everywhere. The desks weren't even in groups any longer. It was a mess because everybody was getting up and moving at the same time. And so it wasn't that the group wasn't working. In fact, the students loved the small group work that they were doing. It wasn't that she wasn't prepared with her materials, but the transition just with the kiddos at the time was not working very well. So what we decided was, she had these great boxes. Let's just move the boxes. So we taught them to take a moment to gather all the materials, put everything into the box for that station. And then one person, the materials manager, picked it up and brought it over to the next desk. And so we just had 7 people up in the classroom moving, and then they'd go back to their seat, open up their box, and they're ready to go. And that worked so much better for that classroom. We talked about maybe, with some smaller classes, we'll get everybody up and moving. But for right now, just moving the materials is a great transition for her. So sometimes you've got to rethink it.
Right. And that's the sign of a reflective teacher.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you say, well, that didn't work, I'm not going to do that again. Give it some time, figure out what the barriers are, what the obstacles are, and, try again.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about just that briefly. When we coach transitions, what are your big tips for coaches or teachers who are working on coaching themselves through this transition period? Any big tips aside from the ones I think you've done a beautiful job kind of breaking down the process of coming up with a great transition and working with that to be smooth. But what else would you tell people who are coaching or working to coach themselves?
I would definitely highly suggest videotaping. I read somewhere that teachers make more decisions during the day than some people make in a week.
Yeah. Yes.
You have to remember that while you're transitioning and you're thinking of what's the next thing, and I got to remember to do this. And so videotaping really helps you to pay attention to what the students are actually doing. So I would definitely suggest videotaping themselves. I would suggest them, if they don't have the opportunity to videotape, maybe having someone come in or even a student look at what's going on during the transition. What are my students doing, and how is that different from what I expect them? And make sure that you know what you do expect, because if you don't know what you expect your students to do, then they're not going to know what to do anyway. So just being proactive, and then as the transitions are happening and behaviors get habitualized, so maybe after a couple of weeks or maybe a few months, it's slipping a little bit, your transition time. So just make sure that those are critical moments to capture more instructional time, so that you're really being reflective on your teaching practice.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's, even if you don't have, I love the idea of videoing, because that can be really helpful, and place that camera in different places in the classroom. I mean, the transitions are about the students. So this is a great opportunity to record your students and not necessarily have to be in camera, which a lot of people don't enjoy being on camera. I've been doing it 12 years and still don't enjoy it, but move that camera around. But then you could also, that success criteria that we talked about earlier, put those down and put a little checkbox next to them, and have a student with a stopwatch. Just, hey, time how long it takes us to get from A to B, and check off the things that you see. And then they can just turn it into you and go right into work, and you can take a look at it later on and use that to help you reflect. So that's great. That's great. So anything else about transitions as we end up wrapping up today? Anything else for our audience?
Just make sure you don't go into transition overload. You don't want to have 50 different songs for 50 different transitions. I could see myself with the wireless doorbell, just, plugging away at everything. But, it's not to entertain me and it's not to show how cool gadgets I have. It's to make sure that students realize that, yes, this is what I mean when we transition, and this is the amount of time, because we're here to maximize the amount of time we are together.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, I would add, at the beginning of the year, that's the key time to be teaching those routines. Right now, everybody's kind of going back over them and maybe adding a few in there, and really thinking about that purposefulness, as you mentioned, that why, and when it needs to happen. So like on day 1 of the school year, I don't need to teach my students how do we, walk to the library together, because we're not going to the library for 2 weeks.
Right.
So hold off on those, teach them as they come up and as they're meaningful, and not try to go through all of them and then expect everyone to remember all the different functions. So well, this has been a really great conversation, Mindy. I'm so glad that you joined us today. And I know we're going to have you back for some more episodes, break down some footage with you. So thanks again. And we'll see you again soon. So audience, tune in next week for another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show.